A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, I don't know about you, but the escalating anti-Semitism that is going on, no doubt right around the world, but we least think that Australia should have these sorts of things happening. And whether it's fire bombings, whether it's graffiti on walls, or what's happened just this week, the dreadful circumstance of a couple of nurses in New South Wales and their open flagrant disregard for human life, with the suggestion that they may have even taken the lives of Jewish people in the New South Wales health system. Well, Bill Muehlenberg's been thinking through all of these sorts of issues and the escalating anti-Semitism. Bill, a special welcome back to 2020.
Many thanks again, Neil.
Bill, each week we might be thinking, how far can this go? And this week, things have been on the rise so far as anti-Semitism goes. All the rhetoric from our leaders doesn't seem to be doing too much. It's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah, well, you're right about the escalation. It's just ramping up every week and getting worse. And as you also rightly say, it's exactly because we seem to have such very weak leadership with Labour, certainly Albanese. Federally, Minns has been a bit better in New South Wales as Premier. Allen here in Victoria, pretty lousy. So between very weak leaders who deliberately want to, keep, hate to say it, the Muslim vote, certainly Western Sydney, who tend to go with Labour, to keep that vote on side, therefore being willing to see the escalation of attacks on Australian Jews. It's very scary, and I have to keep saying, look at Germany, 1930s, and how things started off quietly but escalated there as well, and we're seeing a repeat of history, it seems to me.
It may be connected in some ways, and I'll get your impressions here. Some of our federal government foreign policies around Israel may have been fueling the fires of anti-Semitism here in Australia. The likes of Penny Wong's our foreign minister and the Prime Minister, and his past comments around Israel and two-state solutions and pro-Palestinians, those sorts of things, they're challenging and all about shoring up a vote in Western Sydney, but actually creating some fire of anti-Semitism. Any thoughts from you around the way that these things might not be so easy to unravel?
Yeah, well, you're quite right again. Elbow of the socialist left faction, Penny Wong as well, all, not exactly friends of Israel, but all quite happy to push the whole agenda of the radical left, including two-state solutions. The Palestinians are being oppressed. Israel is a genocidal nation. If it weren't for Israel, everything would be sweetness and light in the Middle East. This whole crooked agenda, which is so typical of the far left, which Albo, Penny, and others have fully bought into, that too has to add to the mix. You're setting the stage. You're making a climate in which it's becoming more and more dangerous simply to identify as being Jewish in Australia. You don't know if you can walk down the street safely anymore. I mean, a day after, right, October 7, we had the famous or infamous rioting going on in Sydney with the chants of, from the river to the sea and all that. None of that was dealt with by the authorities at the time. They're now starting, right, 14, 15 months later, to at least, as you say, put a bit of rhetoric into it, beefing up hate speech laws and the like, but A, is it too little, too late? And B, if they're really flaming the fires here, it doesn't matter how many laws on hate speech they introduce, if they're not going to really deal with the root problem, sadly, we're going to see more of this, including the horrible things we just found in the hospital system in New South Wales.
It was on Wednesday that story began to break, and a deep investigation that started immediately in New South Wales, trying to weed out activist Islamists in our health system, I wonder whether that sort of investigation is going to grow and grow and grow as we've seen more and more things begin to come to light.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I keep saying we're in early stages even now in the weeks to come. What else are we going to learn? Whether in the hospital system, obviously we have all kinds of people in all kinds of places. The police system in our schools, again, most we would have to point out, whether Muslims or other immigrants are, peaceful, love the country and want to fit in, but we know that a good percentage do not. We know that there's those who are dedicated to seeing not only the destruction of the nation of Israel, but want to see a global intifada. They want to see Jews throughout the world exterminated. So this couple, at least this pair of nurses, and again, I was asked early on, well, do we know for sure they're Muslims or immigrants? So I replied and said, well, we don't want to generalize, but right, when you have the gal with the head covering, when they're talking about standing up for the Palestinians and their hatred of Jews and maybe slightly darker skin, you can suspect that it probably wasn't Christians who were involved in this particular thing. We know there is a track record of Jew hatred and, Christian hatred, and some will act this out, and if they're found to have they injured or killed other patients over, as long as they've been in the hospital system. Again, all this should come to light in the days ahead, but boy, scary stuff, and we Australians ought to be very concerned indeed.
And perhaps, Bill, some compassion for peace-loving Muslims who are just as disturbed by the actions of that pair as any ordinary right-thinking Australian might be. So the trouble is here, when you've got this sort of thing happening, then there's going to be some level of doubt over everyone who's working in the health system who might be wearing some form of Muslim clothing, and the risk that all Muslims might be coloured by the same brush, and that wouldn't be a fair thing to do either.
That's right, and a good point. And again, the balance is needed. On the one hand, as we already said, the majority, hopefully, of Australian Muslims would not approve of this, would condemn it. However, the other thing that can be said is too often when we do find events like this, whether in Australia or elsewhere, whether it's a terror attack of one kind or another, we do wait for, where are the Islamic spokespersons, spokesmen in this case. We often don't hear them coming out and unequivocally condemning this kind of thing. That's the real worry. While the majority may find it off-putting, to say the least, too often we're not getting Islamic leadership in Australia coming out clearly without any doubt condemning something like this in the strongest of terms. So that, too, can flame the fires if there's not condemnation immediately and very publicly made, certainly by the leadership. It's just going to, fan the flames even further, and it's going to be a real worry in the days ahead.
No doubt your heart, as mine is, has Jewish people in mind who will be, in fact, under some levels of anxiety when this sort of thing could happen if they were to go to a public hospital. Let me ask you, though, there's an old saying, after Saturday comes Sunday. And as Christian believers, we recognise that saying is about Saturday being the people of the book who are the Jewish people, and Sunday, the worshippers on Sunday, the Christian people. We're both known as people of the book, and in some nations, Christians are under as much intense pressure as Jewish people are because of persecution from hardcore Islamists. This is not yet overflowing into the Christian community, but there obviously are people who are very hardcore. It's not just Jews that might be in their sights, but Christians too. Any thoughts from you around that?
Well, on Wednesday when this broke, I did write a piece, and I did mention, of course, the Quran, the Sirah, the biographies, the Hadith, the traditions, and so on of Islam have all stated quite clearly not only where Jews are viewed and how they're viewed in Islam, but the same with Christianity. So you are quite right. If they want to, many of them have made it clear, whether Hamas in Gaza or Iran or others, want to see every Jew exterminated, not just from the Middle East, but the face of the earth. A lot of them have also made it pretty clear what they think of Christians. And so, yeah, it's not just Jews. Obviously, we think of them and pray for them, but Christians can also be. Well, we know they have been for 1,400 years, probably more Christians killed at the hands of Islam over the centuries than even more than, say, the horrible things of the last couple of centuries and world wars. So it's a worry that we have to face up to. And again, it includes other things, looking more carefully at unchecked immigration, looking more carefully at multiculturalism. Is it really the strength of Australia, as Al will keep saying, or has it become more of a divisive and almost a risky policy that they've been running with for so long? So we have to think clearly about this. We certainly don't want to see more people, including hospital patients, at risk because of an ideology which is at heart quite hateful of both Jews and Christians.
Well, escalating anti-Semitism, and we've seen some extremes happening this week, and those investigations developing and things spreading further and wider. And in the context, Bill, of the ultimatum that's given in the Middle East to Hamas, holding those hostages, and the ultimatum given by Donald Trump to release them this weekend, our time. I think it turns out to be Sunday, our time, but there could be hell on earth is the way that the US president describes that. That'll be affecting the feelings of everyone, whether they're activist or peaceful here in Australia, so far as people who ascribe to Islam.
So many things happening right now, as you mentioned, with the hostages still. It's not just an Australian issue, not an American. It's a global issue. So, while Jews fear for their lives living in Israel, we're seeing, sadly, fearing for their lives in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne. So we got to pray that our authorities, our leaders, politicians, crack down on all this, really get to the bottom of this nursing scandal, and, really start putting the people first ahead of vote chasing and the like.
Well, Bill, always appreciate your comments. There's a lot of things that are happening and things developing almost by the hour. For listeners, you might want to connect with some of the writings that Bill has on this topic through the week, as one I can draw attention to, Home Truths on Israel, Islam and the West. And Bill, just appreciate your insights and sharing those with listeners once again today on 2020. For listeners, you can get that website, billmuehlenberg.com, or simply Google Culture Watch one word. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thanks again, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.